I am not focused on politics. I'll let other parties focus on politics. I'm focused on actually delivering the things that Canadians told me this summer they need.
The Prime Minister says he spent the last couple of months listening to Canadians, but the latest polling suggests his government still has a lot of ground to make up. If an election were held today, the latest seat projections have the Conservatives in a 135-seat lead over Justin Trudeau's Liberals. And now that the NDP has pulled its supply and confidence deal with the Liberals, where will the numbers go from here? The Root.ca's Éric Grenier is here to break down what this shakeup means for the party's standing. Éric, good to talk to you, man. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, David.
So both partners in this supply and confidence agreement, the Liberals and the NDP, were low in the polls and both needed some shaking up. I mean, could this potentially be an inflection point that changes anything for the Liberals or the NDP?
Well, I don't think it's going to do much for the Liberals because the NDP, while it was a member of the supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals, I'm not sure if a lot of Canadians were perceiving the two parties as being involved, which is maybe one of the reasons that the NDP wanted to get out of it. The polling that we've seen about the CASA was generally, you could describe the viewpoints of Canadians in 3 ways. There was about half of Canadians who either weren't really all that much aware of it or felt like it didn't make much of a difference, about a quarter who thought it was a good idea, and a quarter who thought it was a bad idea. And among the Liberals and New Democrats, on the whole, more of their voters did like the deal. So the fact that the NDP is pulling out of the deal, I'm not sure if it's going to help either of the parties. It might make the things a bit easier for the New Democrats to position themselves as an opposition to the Liberals as they get closer to the election. But they're still in a really tough position. If the Liberals are in a position to lose government, which is where they are in the polls, the NDP is also in a position to potentially lose a lot of seats too. So both parties are in a bad position, and it was one of the reasons why I think the CASA was able to survive, is that both of them were facing some pretty rough results if an election was sparked.
Okay, so nobody really got a bump from this, despite the fact that it delivered on the projects, the policies and the programs that they outlined and agreed to. What do they do now? Is there a way the Liberals can use this? Is there a way the NDP can use this to lift things, or what does the data tell us about the value of this move by the NDP today?
Well, I think from the Liberals' perspective, their options are a little bit limited because we do not see that there is a lot of voters available to them on the right. While the Conservatives have made up a lot of ground, a lot of those voters are lost to the Liberals. It'll be hard for them to get them back. They have a lot more to gain from the left. So how do you go after New Democratic voters who are upset that Jagmeet Singh has pulled the plug on this deal and might bring in a Conservative government? I'm not sure if that's going to be an easy message to pass along. For the NDP, I think that there was a chunk of their voters that might not have been happy with some of the compromises they had to make with the Liberal government. But again, I find that it is a difficult position for both parties because if you look at how Canadians view things on economic issues, on social issues, there's usually one group that is supporting the Conservatives. They view things in a particular way. Right. And there's another group that is supporting the Liberals and the NDP, and they largely view things the same way as well. So there's not a lot of animosity between the actual voters who support the Liberals and the New Democrats. They are largely people who view the world in the same way. So I think it is going to be tricky for either of them, but at the very least for the NDP, their rhetoric didn't always match their actions in the way that they were backing up the government. At least now their rhetoric might back up their actions, but we'll see what happens when they are actually pushed to make a decision once there's a confidence vote, if the NDP is going to risk going to an election campaign.
So what about the Conservatives, Éric? Where do they fit into this? Because Jagmeet Singh, he slammed the Liberals on his way out the door, but then very quickly pivoted to the threat that he says Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives represent to programs, so what Canadians need. I mean, is there a vulnerability opened up in any of this for the Conservatives, or do they just keep coasting along with their double-digit leads?
Well, I think for the Conservatives, the longer we go before the next election, the worse things can get for them because their polling has more or less stagnated, if you can call it that, at 41, 42% of the vote. They haven't been able to go through that ceiling much more than that. So they do seem to be at their peak, at their ceiling, at least for the time being. And the longer this goes on, the more there's a chance that something happens that improves Liberal numbers. Maybe Justin Trudeau decides to resign and that shakes things up. So for them, having an election sooner rather than later is the best case scenario, I think, for them. And this does ratchet up the pressure on the New Democrats to actually go to an election campaign. So if this results in a campaign this fall rather than next spring or next fall, then this is going to be a win for the Conservatives.
Yeah.
And if we see that over the next few months that the NDP is continuing to make compromises and sacrifices to try to prevent an election campaign, then I think that also opens up an opportunity for the Conservatives to say that you can't support the New Democrats, they're just supporting the Liberals anyway. If you want change, you got to vote for us. So I think overall this is going to be a win for the Conservatives, because the closer an election is for them, the higher chances are that they will form the government.
Yeah, I think the Conservatives would be fairly content to stagnate at 41 to 42% of the popular vote, because that's a pretty big majority government. Look, in the short term, we don't know if we're going to have an election, but we know we're going to have a couple of by-elections. La Salle-Verdun, a Liberal seat, that is what I hear, a three-way race with the Bloc and the NDP. And Elmwood-Transcona, an NDP seat, appears to be a two-way between the NDP and the Conservatives. Does this have any impact on those races? Or are they strictly about their own thing? How do you view it?
I think that they could have an impact on the New Democrats. It will make it a lot easier for their candidates who are knocking on doors to say, you can vote for us if you're upset at Justin Trudeau. That might have been a harder message to pass along when they were supporting the government in place. So we'll see if this will end up helping them in the by-election. We don't have any real polling out of either of them, so we don't know if things are going to get better from here on out. But for the New Democrats, if they end up winning both of those by-elections, holding Elmwood-Transcona, winning in La Salle-Verdun, then this seems like a genius move. If they lose both of them, then where are they going to go from there? So it is a high-risk proposition. If it pays off with 2 wins, whether or not it's the cause, they can say it was the cause, and it'll look good for them. So those by-elections are going to be super important for the NDP, but also, of course, for the Liberals. If they lose La Salle-Verdun, it's another Toronto-St. Paul's. If the Bloc ends up winning it, then we're all a bit confused about what it all means.
Well, it's just Quebec politics has a way of doing that historically. Eric, always good to speak with you. This is the RIT.ca's Éric Grenier. Welcome back to Power and Politics. It's time now for our daily power rankings. I wonder what we're going to talk about. I'm joined by Larissa Waller, a former Director of Communications for Ontario Premier Doug Ford. And here with me in the studio is Stevie O'Brien, a former Chief of Staff to Liberal Cabinet Ministers, and former NDP MP Matthew Dubé. All right, gang, let's get to it. We're going to play our quote of the day. Today's quote is this: I am not focused on politics. Stevie, who do you think said that on a political show?
Prime Minister Trudeau.
Matthew?
The Prime Minister.
Larissa?
And he's not being truthful. It was the Prime Minister.
Okay, let's play the clip.
I am not focused on politics. I'll let other parties focus on politics. I'm focused on actually delivering the things that Canadians told me this summer they need.
Okay, that was the Prime Minister answering questions today about the NDP ending the supply and confidence deal that was supposed to hold until next summer. Stevie, I'm not thinking about politics. Maybe he should a little bit more. I mean, he is obviously thinking about politics. He's a politician. What did you make of his reaction today to kind of just say, I'm focused on delivering. I hope the NDP will stay focused on delivering. This is all, and not put political interest in the way of making Parliament work?
Well, the deal was put together in order to deliver some pretty key pieces of legislation and policy, and they're not finished yet. So to that point, it's a bit surprising, and I agree with the Prime Minister. He needs to finish pharmacare. He needs to focus and deliver what was promised, because he will be judged against that, as will, I believe, Mr. Singh. But yeah, it's also, of course, he's also thinking about the politics of it, but part of the politics is delivering the policy.
Right. Matthew, what was your reaction when you saw this, your first reaction?
Well, it's funny because maybe the Prime Minister needs to be a little more political. I know that there's a lot of New Democratic MPs who've been wanting to take the fight to the Conservatives for a long time. They think that he's a phony when it comes to standing up for working people, and it's pretty telling coming from the NDP as the party of working people and wanting to stand up for those folks. And so I think there's just a sense that there's a lot that's been done, there's a lot that's been delivered, but much like the late Ed Broadbent said, people saw that as a criticism of Jagmeet when he pointed out that there need to be a bit of runway to stand on their own 2 feet. I think that's exactly what's happening here. I think it wasn't criticism, it was advice, and I see Jagmeet taking that now and untying the one hand behind the back and doing what the apolitical, supposedly Prime Minister won't do, and actually going head-to-head with Pierre Poilievre and calling him out on the things that he says he will and won't do.
Okay, we're going to dig more into that in a second. But Larissa, your reaction. I mean, you texted me when there was news going around. Oh, there's going to be a 1 o'clock news conference. What's going on? What was your reaction when we got the confirmation that SACA was done?
He had to end the agreement. He was ruining the NDP brand, and he was every day reaffirming that he was in a coalition government with the Liberals, which made it impossible to run against the Liberals whenever an election's called. So he had to do it. I don't know if the by-election in Manitoba plays into the timing. I think a lot of NDP supporters are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief today, and a lot of Liberal supporters are kind of, marking the end of the good times, and now it's going to be harder for them.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the by-elections or not, but like the by-elections, return to Parliament, it all sort of aligns. So, that's your quick initial reaction. We get everyone to pick ups and downs. There's really only one issue today, but Matthew, you were saying you see this as a good move by the NDP, the one-arm tie behind the back. Explain that to me. Why can you not take the fight to Pierre Poilievre and still be part of the supply and confidence agreement?
Well, it's funny because I think a decision was made by Jagmeet and the NDP caucus to work with the Liberals, but I think ultimately one of the biggest challenges is that despite all the things that have been delivered, you are at times overshadowed. You aren't the government, you're supporting the government and you're getting things done, and that's very laudable and it's extremely important and it'll make a difference for a lot of Canadians. But at the end of the day, the Liberals just seem to refuse to take the fight to Pierre Poilievre. There's this desire to have a different kind of tone, and I don't think that matches how people are feeling and about both him and just about the state of things in general. And I know that a lot of New Democrats feel that they're hearing in their ridings about wanting to see that contrast and everything. And there's a lot of orange-blue fights. So I think there's a chance to step out from under that.
So I want to ask you something specific on that. Taking the fight to him, you're saying the Liberals aren't doing it the way that you think they should. So we talked about this on the last night's show. These videos that came out on Labor Day, the NDP called him a liar and a fraud in their video. Is that what you're talking about? They want more of that kind of pointed, harsh attack on the Conservative leader, and they felt they couldn't do it in the SACA?
There's a lot of frustration among New Democrats. Like many New Democrat MPs, many former MPs, members of the party are working people. They're members of unions. And they see this smoke and mirrors coming up, and then they go to Winnipeg on Labor Day and they see a Conservative candidate who says that working people are forgotten. And from what I hear, didn't even march in the Labor Day parade. So I think when you see that contrast there, I think there is a strong desire to start pushing back on that and seeing that when you look at the polls, you see the Prime Minister not doing well, unlikely to win the next election. So maybe it's time to put a new alternative out there for those that are feeling concerned, to put it that way, about the possibility of a Conservative government, but knowing that they've kind of given up on the Liberals. Dissatisfaction with the Liberals is also very high among Democratic supporters. So I think something needed to change. And to your point, this is the time of year to do it. This isn't something that happened overnight, despite what the Conservatives will try to tell us. This is a larger conversation, and and I think they've landed in a good place between now and the next election.
Okay, so clearly you see this as an up for the NDP, a positive move. Stevie, up or down for the Liberals? Where are we?
Down for the Liberals, because I think the announcement today overshadowed what we should be talking about, which is the interest rate cuts and the improving economy. What the Liberals need is more time. They need a runway. I think they are confident that they've put in place the right policies, the right investments in housing and infrastructure, and the right measures on affordability that we're going to see. And what we are seeing is the economy improving, a soft landing.
Well, I mean, unemployment's going up, the growth is slowing down, but you're getting through the inflationary pressures, right? There's a horizon that's more positive, right?
There's a more positive horizon. They need more time for the impact of their housing policies to be felt as well. So what they need is more time. And two additional things on that. One, it's disappointing, I think, that the announcement today by the NDP puts into question how long that runway is going to be. So
it's shorter, it seems, almost certainly, right?
Seems that way. And as well, well, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, all right. Well, Larissa, Matthew says this is a good move by the NDP. Do you think this is a good move by the NDP? Do you think they did it right today? I mean, what's your pick on how this all happened today?
It's the only move by the NDP that they could do. I think they did a poor job of it. I think issuing a video like that and then not having spokespeople there, like from a communications point of view, it's a bit bizarre. It allows pundits like us to fill in that void. And there's more people filling in that void that'll be very critical of the agreement even to start with, and the NDP sort of decision-making, track record while in the agreement. So if you look at even the statement that accompanied the video, it said millions of people have been helped. That's just not true. There's a lot of things that they've started, like pharmacare, like dental, that have not yet gone through the normal course of legislation. Pharmacare hasn't even passed the Senate. Provinces aren't involved. Like, there's so much more to do, and the NDP is trying to take early credit for stuff, and I don't blame them, because they've gotten no credit at all on hallmark policies that were always traditionally NDP that the Liberals have taken and made their own.
Well, Matthew, there have been a bunch of policies like rental support, doubling GST. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people, I think, is the latest number have access to the new dental care program. But the job isn't done, right? To Larissa's point on pharmacare, things are still in the Senate. There aren't deals with provinces. Like, the implementation of the policies, they still have a way to go, and they've ended their runway to make sure it's all implemented. It seems like they're just forcing it all onto the Liberals to somehow get over the line without a reliable partner now.
Well, at the end of the day, you're ending a formal agreement, but I also think that in some ways that provides more leverage, right? You look at how minority parliaments function normally. I think a little precarity is important. It has made minority parliaments successful in the past. I mean, no one is saying that there's not going to be a desire to work together on these things. I think it's just that there needs to be some accountability and an ability for the NDP to stand on its own and showcase the alternative that they present, notably to the Conservatives who are leading in the polls, as opposed to being seen as, the partner. There's unfortunately a lot of disinformation that's out there about what the arrangement actually was. You hear things like coalition government being said,
right.
But the reality, I mean, I wish it was a coalition government. We would have had new Democratic ministers, and that certainly would have been exciting. But having the end to this formal arrangement, I think, is something that allows for a little more pressure. I think that'll be useful in getting some of these things over the finish line. But ultimately, the question for a political party is always, how do you want to affect change? And the best way to affect change is to form government. So it's great to have gotten some of these things done with another party, but ultimately the NDP believes that they are best suited to implement what they see as the whole agenda, and not just the parts and parcels that you'll get in an arrangement with a different party that's not always ideologically aligned.
So, Stevie, Liberal caucus retreat next week, coming off a cabinet retreat where Karina Gould said, I'm confident this will last until June. And she's today like, well, here we are. Nobody told us this was coming until they did. I mean, what do you do as Liberals right now? I mean, how does this affect your ability to manage the agenda, to travel, to go around and do things when who knows what you're facing in the fall? I
think Jagmeet and the NDP are going to wake up at the end of the month and realize that they've lost a game of chicken. I think that video was it looked very much like a campaign video. There were very strong words, fighting words sort of in there, and a strong position. I believe Poilievre said he will be coming out with a non-confidence motion at the earliest opportunity, probably going to have an opposition day motion in September, and then the NDP is going to likely, I'd say, back down from this very strong stance. And I think that that's going to leave a little egg on their face, and it's sort of all of this push now and this momentum will evaporate.
Right, and Larissa, I think Pierre Poilievre was probably going to do a confidence motion through the opposition day motion anyway. But Jagmeet Singh's language about the Liberals too weak, too selfish, too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. I mean, that's a pretty strong critique of the fundamental character of the people you've been working with for the last 2.5 years. How do you then vote confidence for them, even if there is like a basket of policy goodies that you can say, this is what we got for our stance?
I have no idea what he'll do or how he'll do it with a straight face, but I don't know how he's been doing this with a straight face for the last 2 years. On one side, trying to criticize the government. On the other side, voting with the government every single time. And I agree with Stevie. I think this is a game of chicken that the NDP is going to lose. I read on Twitter earlier today that, the real kind of interesting next move would be if the Prime Minister introduced a confidence motion and forced the NDP right off the bat to pick a side, right? Because the Liberals are more ready for an election than the NDP are. The Conservatives are ready, right? The Conservatives want an election anytime. But it will be interesting to watch the Liberals and the NDP play chicken on this one, and I think the NDP is going to lose.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew, I don't know if Justin Trudeau would do that. It seems like it might be a bit of a reckless move given the state of things. Like their target needs to be Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, right? So with the language Jagmeet Singh used in this video, I mean, this was shot a week and a half ago, according to Brad Levine. This was a deliberate process that they took their time on. Right. Boy, it's hard to walk back from too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests. How do you support them on anything? when your Dear John letter says it's not me, it's you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly why I think that this scenario is more ideal, because when you're looking at it by a case by case, in a case by case way, bill to bill, budget to budget, then I think you're in a stronger position to make those criticisms without also being tagged with everything else the government has done. There are plenty of things that happen in Parliament that are significant, that aren't confidence motions. There are plenty of things that, that happen in committees that are significant, that aren't confidence motions. And I think the formal framework, to some extent, tied the NDP's hands, and not wrongly, because again, there was
They signed it. They negotiated it,
gains
right?
were made, and I'm certainly not putting that into question. But I think what it does now is there's a realization that the government's, the perception that Canadians have and the frustration with government is so far gone, and the result is going to be a government, potential rather, conservative government that stands against everything that the NDP stands for. And so if the Liberals aren't going to take that fight, and if the Liberals aren't going to stand four square for
How
the
are they
right
not
things,
taking the fight, though? Help me understand that. What is it the Liberals aren't doing that the NDP think they can do?
I think using language like the language that you quoted earlier, right, is calling it out, calling out the phony pro-worker narrative that exists from a conservative leader who, when he was in government, adopted numerous pieces of anti-union, anti-worker legislation. So I really think it's just about setting, this is why it's an up for me. It's setting a parliament where there'll be new opportunities. And let's not forget, both by-elections take place the day Parliament comes back. And so I don't want to hedge my bets or count chickens before they're hatched, or pick your metaphor or your imagery that you'd like, but I think it'll shuffle the deck as well in a way that I think will change where we're at today. It's great that I appreciate Larissa's point about how it's rolled out, but I think when people really start paying attention again, the NDP will be in a strong position, and the dust will have settled on today's conversation, and we'll be focused on what's happening going forward.
Rollout is often something bubble people care about, right? But the fundamental thing is they've broken their partnership. I mean, Stevie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the two by-elections are going to be a little bit of a litmus test to see how the NDP will go after that. I said before that the video looked a lot like a campaign video, but I think it's also looked a lot like a fundraising video, and they may hope that that video, a little momentum, can get them over the edge in Quebec and Manitoba by-elections. If they are successful in those, maybe they will go more quickly to the polls, and if not, then spend the time trying to distance themselves from the Liberals, which would be great for the Liberals to give them the runway they need for their policies to come to fruition.
They must have been hearing at the doors in Manitoba, the NDP, that they don't like the association with the Liberals. You had to think that's part of it, don't you think, Stevie?
I would imagine that must have gone into the thinking.
Right. All right, Larissa, we got about a minute, and then they take the network away from me. What are your thoughts on what we just heard from Matthew in particular, that this frees up the NDP to go after Pierre Poilievre, the guy you like, in a way that they feel the Liberals maybe are not?
They could always go after whoever they want, right? But they chose instead not to go after the Prime Minister, a guy who made life so unaffordable that groceries went up $700 a year, housing's a disaster, crime on our streets. Like, all these things happened over the last 9 years on the Prime Minister's watch, and that's who Jagmeet Singh, for the last 2 years, has decided to prop up. And so I think that's the question that he's going to be facing on the by-election day, and that's the question that voters will ultimately judge him on whenever the election is called.
Okay, we have not heard from Jagmeet Singh today outside of the video version of the NDP leader. We do anticipate he'll have a news conference tomorrow, and we're hoping he'll join us here on Power and Politics. I want to thank three of you for joining me on Power and Politics: Larissa Waller, Stevie O'Brien, and Matthew Dubé. And thank you.